welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to have you with us to kick off MITH's Spring 2019 Digital Dialogue season. It's nice to be back in the flow. We have a great lineup of speakers coming to campus this year, and we're particularly honored to have Hugh Cayless here helping us kick off the series. My name is Trevor Munoz. I'm interim director here at MITH. So welcome to you all, and welcome to the folks joining on the live stream. I want to mention our gratitude to the College of Arts and Humanities, which has helped us up our live streaming game. They're going to be working with us from here on out. So those of you who are offline can't see the better camera and the better microphone that's hopefully providing you this wonderful remote experience. Anyway, it is our custom at Digital Dialogues to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves and say your name and where you're from, just so we can get a sense of each other in the space. So Stephanie, I think I'm going to start with you.
I'm Stephanie Sapienza, I'm on the research faculty here.
Hi everyone, I'm Pradam Lamblad and I work at MITH.
I'm Kyle Bickoff. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of English and a current Moore dissertation fellow.
Setsuko, English PhD.
Mike Poston, I'm a computer programmer at the Folger.
I'm Christine, a recent graduate of UFD and currently working for the vacancy in electronic archives.
Susan Weisner, digital humanities librarian, special collections and performing arts.
Hey, I'm Adam Kreisberg and I'm a lecturer in the high school upstairs.
I'm Katrina Fenlon, I'm an assistant professor at the high school.
I'm Kelsey Corlett-Rivera. I'm a librarian over in McKeldin, head of the research commons.
I'm Sean. I'm in the MLAS program.
I'm Lillian Doherty from the classics department.
Will Thomas. I'm a PhD student in the iSchool at GA with the At-Home Initiative.
I'm Pam Lappin. I'm in the history department.
I'm Brett Bobley. I direct the Office of Digital Humanities for the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I'm Rafi Yanti. I'm a researcher here at MITH.
And it's my pleasure now to turn over the floor to Raf to introduce our speaker today.
It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague Hugh Cayless, who is Senior Digital Humanities Research Developer with the Duke Collaboratory for Classics Computing at Duke University. Hugh holds a PhD in Classics and a Master's degree in Information Science, both from UNC Chapel Hill, and he's a very active member of the Text Encoding Initiative, or TEI, and serves on the TI Technical Council, which is an 11-member international committee that supervises amendments to the TI guidelines, and he's been previously chair of the council itself. His current research interests include the development of tools and techniques for publishing digital critical editions, digital epigraphy and papyrology, and application programming interfaces for digital publication systems. And I'm really looking forward to his talk. Please join me in welcoming Hugh Cayless.
Well, thanks, Raf and Trevor. Yeah, this talk is less scripted than the talks I'm accustomed to give, partly because there were just a lot of things going on in my head as I was trying to put it together. Also because American Airlines failed me last night, and I was hoping to have a couple of hours, last night to kind of put the finishing touches on it and get my slide deck in shape and all that. And that didn't happen. I ended up driving from Durham instead. Which was all fine, and my flight was canceled in the end. So I'm glad we made that decision. But normally I get very nervous doing public speaking, and so normally to stave off the fear of freezing up in front of people, I just script everything out. So I have a fallback. One of the things I learned long ago is that the audience can't actually tell if you're having a panic attack. Your voice might get a little shaky, but it might do that anyway. So anyway, this is less scripted than I normally am. Partly, though, I hope that this will be an actual dialogue. So you should feel free to interrupt, ask for clarification, say no, that's stupid, you know, I would hope we can actually have something of a dialogue. So there are places built in where we could go off on tangents, and if we do, that's fine. This is, I have to warn you, going to get kind of nerdy, and that's another reason why I hope this can be a dialogue, because otherwise it's going to be me talking for 40 minutes, you probably sleeping for about 20 of those, you know, and then we try to have a discussion at the end. I think that would be suboptimal. So I find myself sort of quite frequently wanting to push back on what seems to be one of the sort of dominant narrative strands of digital humanities, however you choose to define that. Namely that it primarily concerns these sort of large-scale, processing-intensive, computerized analysis collections of material of various kinds, not just text. Obviously, there are lots of projects and people that do this work, and you know, it's great that they do. But there are also strands of DH that are less concerned maybe with quantity, and often look, if you sort of peer really close at them, a bit more like traditional scholarship, like, you know, philology, just done with computers. So their substance relies on painstaking, methodical, iterative work. And while computing does enhance it in a variety of ways, its core is really quintessentially human. And maybe most importantly, it doesn't necessarily happen fast. So one of the first proper scholarly articles that I wrote, I should preface by saying this is in some ways going to be a catalog of things that I and those around me have screwed up over the years. And so we're starting with an example of how I screwed up. So I wrote this thing, I don't know, probably in about 2006, and then it was finally published in like 2009. And it was about the ways, the lessons that the survival of ancient texts might teach us things about digital preservation and sustainability. But I made a mistake that I didn't spot until later. It didn't really fatally undermine the argument I was making, but it could have if I pushed on it a little bit harder. So I was talking about the reception of Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, and I said this. So Virgil was widely regarded as the preeminent poet of his day. Even before it was published posthumously, his Aeneid was proclaimed by his fellow poet Propertius to be greater than the Iliad of Homer. Virgil instantly became part of the Latin canon, and knowledge of his poetry would have been a necessary prerequisite to be seen as culturally literate at all periods of the Roman Empire. So, and here I referenced a poem by his contemporary Propertius. Let's see if I've got that sort of in the wrong book. No, I failed to open that file. So see, I've already screwed something. Yeah, so I referenced a poem by his contemporary Propertius that includes this couplet. Cedite Romani scriptores, cedite Graii nescio quid maius nascitur Iliade. So give way, you Roman writers, give way, Greeks, something greater than the Iliad is being born. So it seems like pretty solid evidence of the buzz around the Aeneid. And my point was, of course, about the Aeneid's contemporary impact, which only grew after it was published. And when I was writing this, the text I had access to actually was G.P. Gould's 1990 Loeb edition, which is this thing. Loaves, you will have seen them even if you don't quite know what they are. They're the smallish red and green books with the text and translation on facing pages. And you know, they used to have a reputation as being pretty poor editions, but actually the modern ones are quite good. And in fact, the text, Gould's text was probably the best available one until S.J. Hayworth's Oxford Classical Text came out in 2007. So, you know, I had the right thing at hand. But the crucial bit of information I was missing, and which my text did not alert me to, is that this couplet might not belong in that poem at all. And actually might not have the unambiguously laudatory weight it seems to in this context. So James Butrica pointed out in an article on editing Propertius, which I read later on and had, you know, one of those moments of exquisite horror when you realize that you've been wrong in something you published in print. Oh my God. So this thing comes from, it's also quoted in Donatus's Life of Virgil. And Butrica points out that this might actually be kind of sarcastic. So, you know, it was probably something said elsewhere by Propertius. You know, this is the kind of thing you might come out with like at a dinner party or something. This is a bon mot. And, you know, later was interpolated into this text. You know, it was kind of, you know, Propertius said this, so there's a bit of comment in the margin maybe, but, or in between the lines, and the next person who copies the text doesn't understand that this was a comment, and so just puts it into the text. And of course it's an elegiac couplet, so it fits perfectly. So Butrica said, you know, the lines then are a humorous, perhaps even ironic or sarcastic reaction to the noise that greeted the announcement of Virgil's first work on the Aeneid. So yeah, this isn't like, let's go Virgil, this is better than the Iliad. It doesn't completely invalidate the point I was making, fortunately, but it does a bit change its complexion, and I ought to have at least had a footnote about it. But, you know, oh well. One of the things that years of programming has taught me is that it's important to know where errors come from. In this case, it's obviously because I hadn't done the reading. You know, Butrica's article came out in like 1997. I hadn't even finished my PhD at that point. You know, it's the sort of thing I probably should have encountered at some point, but obviously I hadn't. And you know, I remember the quote because it's a little bit unusual to see this kind of cross-referencing between contemporaries going on. So you know, I looked it up in Gould's edition, which is this. It does give you at least an idea that all is not well with this text, right? So you. Butrica has a whole catalog in his quite long article of what he calls dislocations, so places where lines have become unmoored from their original context. So you know, you can see here we've got lines 47 through 50 right before 55, and after line 66 we're jumping to line 77, right? Bad things have happened to this text. The kind of theory is that some bright medieval spark attempted to fix this. You know, things had kind of gone wrong, and he tried to put things right, and in doing so, made it much, much worse. And of course, that's the version that survived to us, and copies of that. So Propertius, particularly Book 2, is full of you know, places where lines are not where they probably ought to be. So you know, well, this is one of the texts I would have had access to. The other there's an online version in Perseus, in the Perseus project. This is it. This doesn't help at all, does it? This doesn't give you kind of any. So it's an older version too. We'll talk about that. But you know, it says it's Lucien Muller's edition from 1898. So it's obviously not current. We have no line numbers at all. So there's actually no suggestion that there's a problem here. You have to know that from other sources. Of course, since it's digital, this might be the first one you ever encounter. This might be the first one you read. And I lost the yeah, it's right at the top. Yeah. Oh, and it says Candide Romani script works, which is also slam. I don't want to slam on the Perseus project to me, but they do fantastic things, and you know they have older editions because they're out of copyright, and the thing that makes editions really copyrightable is the fact that they have an apparatus, which is an intellectual construct, whereas the text is you know, more or less the text, though for Perseus is maybe a bit less so. And yeah, so this is a problem. It comes from Muller's edition, or wait, well. If you look at the, it's down the bottom here, if you look at the, maybe don't tweet this, if you look at the punctuation, particularly, that's not, this is not Muller's edition. It's actually this one. Don't tweet this. You know, I don't think this was because of malice or anything. It's just Perseus got it from someplace else where it was already online, and that place said that this was Muller's, and it might not have been. You can also look maybe at the online lobe in contrast to the print one, and that does give us some help in terms of you know, it does say where lines are messed up, but we've lost even on this page something has gone wrong. We've lost the minimal apparatus that Gould's lobe has. That's actually supposed to be a footnote, and like part of the footnote has bled over into where the apparatus is supposed to be. So yeah, that's all terrible as well. This is paywalled, by the way, so you wouldn't get access to this unless you'd either paid or were at a university who had paid. So, you know, my point here is that even if the online text is more up to date than it purports to be, it still manages to efface much of the complexity that the print edition makes clearer. And these details matter a very great deal, not least because they concern issues that the general reader, let alone a distant reader, may never engage with. So you can imagine a student writing about Homeric themes in Latin love poetry who comes across you know, this reference to the Iliad, doing word searches in Perseus, and you know, nothing will stop them being made to feel foolish when they say, you know, Propertius said Virgil was better than the Iliad. So you know, I think there's a really important point here about accessibility. we don't actually do newcomers to our materials any favors by completely hiding the details from them. We shouldn't expect them to have to bring a lot of prior knowledge with them in order to be able to use our stuff properly. And one of the promises of digital publication is that we can provide you with the context you need to understand something just by linking to it. So we have this kind of problem where our digital scholarly output, we might say, don't really bother looking at me until you know the details. Also shouldn't say, don't need to worry about the details. One of these is kind of exclusive and snobby, and the other is patronizing. So the thing that might have saved me, but didn't, was, if I can find it. So this is Hayworth's OCT edition. And you can see actually there's even more sort of horror in terms of line numbering. But this has a proper apparatus. And so Boutrique actually says all of lines 65 to 80 should be gone. And I'm sorry, this is Latin. Basically, almost everything I show you will be Latin or Greek, or Arabic even, which I don't know. The Life of Virgil, Donatus cites this as a proportion line, and 65 to 6, Boutrique thinks are proportion, but hoc loco alienos, but they don't belong here. They're from a different spot, which we don't know. And this is the sort of thing that these are the details that you only learn by screwing up. So this is kind of one of the themes I want to keep hitting on here. The other is that we don't have to put things out there that lead people to screw up, if we're careful. So I think one of our motivations as we kind of contemplate the giant redo of our source materials that digital media both offers and requires of us must be to avoid laying traps for the uninitiated like this. And of course, scholarship is full of these little landmines designed to trip up the unwary. If you know them, they mean you're part of the in-group. Otherwise, if you don't know them, your opinions can kind of be dismissed. Right? We do this all the time. Digital humanities, being a discipline crossing endeavor, is both uniquely vulnerable to these, and at the same time, it has plenty of its own, right? Oh, you don't code. Why don't you code? You're still using PHP, or substitute your own language of choice. Oh, you're not familiar with Deleuze, right? So I don't need to talk to you, right? These kinds of things both get, they're all over the place. They both get done to us, and we do them to other people in turn. It's kind of, it's academic hazing. Everybody's been through this. I feel like this is a problem. But how do we fix it? I mean, how would we fix this sort of thing? Clearly, we need digital, preferably open access, scholarly editions that don't hide the details. So they have an apparatus, we can do things with it. And obviously with digital editions, we can do much more than simply append footnotes that explain the differing possibilities for the presented text. Just how we might do that depends a bit on what sort of text you're thinking about, though. So I want to further complicate stuff. Those of you unfortunate enough to follow Willard McCarty's humanist email list may have noticed an apparently interminable recent discussion ranging over the nature of text, the suitability of, or unsuitability of particular formats for text, the history of markup languages, and a fair amount of deliberate talking past one another. One of the main sources of confusion in this area is quite simply the variety of what constitutes a scholarly critical edition. The answer is going to be quite different depending on whether you're talking about an ancient work with presumably a singular original that's now only accessible via a variety of much later and probably error-prone copies. Or it could be an ancient work with a single surviving copy, which might be hard to read. Could be a more modern, say a medieval work, which exists in a variety of versions that are not necessarily simple copies. That might differ because they add or subtract material. We could also have a modern work by a single author, which exists in multiple revisions or editions by that author. So, what do you want to do? Do you want to try and recover the original? Do you want to show how the work's expression shifted across time and space? Do you want to show the process by which the author revised their text to arrive at some final version? These are all different motivations, and they'll result in very different kinds of editions. So, we're not talking about one thing when we're talking about a digital scholarly edition. So, it's quite important, I think, not to conceive of the technologies of editions as kind of one size fits all. There can be quite a lot of variance in editions, even within the same discipline, language, and time period. So, one of the projects I work on is called the Digital Latin Library. Let's see if I can zoom that in a bit. So it's a joint initiative of the Society for Classical Studies, the Medieval Academy of America, and the Renaissance Society of America. And its focus is on producing high-quality, open-access, scholarly editions of Latin texts. I have to confess, I chafe a little bit at the language restriction, but it's also it's a place to start cooperating, to start collaborating, because all these disciplines are concerned, all have this in common, that they all deal with Latin texts. So, okay. In the startup phase, which was funded by a grant from the Mellon Foundation, Sam Husky, the PI, and I worked on developing guidelines for marking up critical editions, and then used them to take an existing and quite complex out-of-copyright edition all the way through to publication. And this is the eclogues of Calpurnius Siculus, who was sort of a minor poet, probably from the time of Nero. So we've got the text, we've got down the bottom, we've got a proper looking apparatus, and you can do things with it. So, for example, there's a variation in. Can everybody see this? Do I need to make it bigger? So, so in this line, let's rather, Brother Corridon, this grove, these caves of Father Faunus, let us seek them, and so on. In some versions, antra here, caves, gets swapped with ista, these. So it can be ista, antra, or antra, ista. Latin is one of those languages where word order is much more fluid than it is in English. So so I can use these little widgets to pull up the apparatus, and the existence of a widget says there's a problem in this line, and then I can actually use it to swap them. So the apparatus is no longer a set of notes. It's a dynamic tool for playing with the text that you have in front of you, right? So you can actually, I have found that there's a big difference between trying to compute what the apparatus says in your head and actually just reading it, right? You actually get, you start to get a sense of how does it change things if say those lines about Propertius's lines about Virgil and the Iliad are there or not. Does it make a difference to the flow? And in fact, I think it does. I think if you read them, if you read it without those lines there, you're not really missing anything. And in fact, it's sort of the flow is different. Like throughout the poem, he's always addressing a you singular. The object of that you changes, but suddenly he's talking to everybody, and then he's not again. He's back to talking about you, and it's just in these two lines. So in fact, if you can read things in these different versions, I think it does help you to distinguish. And we can do this because this is a TEI text, and because TEI lets you model textual variation sort of in place. All the interface has to do is say, okay, that's not the lemma, that's a reading. That reading is now a lemma. Done. The CSS does the rest for you, right? So you can make these kinds of changes and see what effects they have, and actually use the apparatus as a tool in a very intuitive way, rather than have to understand it first. And I mean, this is kind of a problem. I mean, grad students mostly don't. Because I mean, just look at it, right? I mean, what the hell does that mean? You know, Entra, NG, Glazer, SQQ, ISTA, PV, ed ante Glazer. I mean, what does that mean? You have to, if you're using a printed version of this, you have to go and look. If you're interested in where a reading came from, you have to go and look up. You know, what do these little codes mean? What does a phi mean? What does a G mean? These are all pointers to manuscripts or families of manuscripts. But to get any sort of picture of what's actually happening is just using the apparatus is really quite difficult. And you know, learners usually just don't bother. They just read the text, right? The one text. So, you know, we can do better by paying attention to these details, and it's details all the way down, right? So the kinds of things that we do here, really, I think, weren't even entirely possible in TEI. until we started working on this, because I was double dipping. I was on the TEI council, and I was working on this, and I could see where there were problems with the apparatus module, where it wouldn't quite do what we needed it to do, and so we could make changes. And obviously, I didn't just go in and make those changes in TEI. We talked about it a lot, but you know, by engaging with this other organization, I was able to do something that was that had real implications for a project that I was being paid to work for. So yeah, you know, details all the way down. But this kind of thing took a really long time, right? We now have this digital Latin library project where you know, we're going to have digital text with apparatus attached to them. And this is only, we're about 40 years since digital text on classical authors actually became available. So the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae started in the 70s. David Packard's Ibicus system, which lets you do Greek on computers, debuted in 1985. What's taken us so long? Well, actually, these things take time, right? This is a multi-dimensional problem. It has axes that stretch between technical, theoretical, economic, and socio-political realms. And we had to have some small successes first to show that this kind of thing was even possible, that we could do digital text. Then we had to have some larger successes so that, you know, someone like Mellon might take notice and give us money to do this. We also had to wait kind of while the economics of publishing printed editions became less viable. And you know, we had to also be able to convince the people who work on scholarly editions that doing things digitally would not shortchange their work, right? We're not going to do we're not going to take your text and do something stupid with it. We're actually going to do it justice. And in fact, maybe we can produce something that's better than a print edition. So, you know, well, okay, how did we get to that place? Like I said, it took time. We did this thing called papyri.info. Which puts papyrus texts online. It's started by, it's really an amalgamation of several different projects. Y'all aren't talking, so you know, let me stop and ask if you have any questions, or if I'm being stupid, or if you're just asleep after lunch. Yeah.
Is there anything like the Digital Latin Library for Greek?
Not yet. TLG has like such weight. TLG is this the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, so the you know, treasury of Greek language. It sounds like a dictionary, but it's not. It's like a collection of texts. They are they have like practically everything from classical through Byzantine Greek. They don't do apparatus. They always are derivative of a print publication, and they're paywalled. And they're paywalled, and they have a really twitchy interface. So if you even give them the idea that you might be like scraping their site, just by like looking things up too fast or paging too fast through the interface, they will shut you off, and you have to send them an email to turn your account back on. This happens like all the time. You know, there are texts where even an experienced classicist will have to look up like every single word because they're weird, and all of that clicking like trips the trigger. No more TLG for you. So, but they have everything. And so it's that I think makes it still a less sort of attractive target. I want Greek. You gotta have and other stuff as well. But we don't unfortunately have it yet. I think it's going to take time. Anything else? Shall I keep going? Yeah, Brett.
I'd like to see more about how the scholarly apparatus works. Do you,
Yeah.
like you showed some of the footnotes. Are those all clickable, or is there more pop-up information, or how does that work?
Yes. So, so I mean, one thing that you can do with these is, you don't have to page back to the introduction to see what this means. You can hover over it and see what codex we're talking about, for example. This is in some ways a concession to the habits of traditional classicists, right? You have to have something like this that looks like what you would expect to see in a printed edition, because that demonstrates that, okay, we're not doing something stupid. The fact that we can produce this this appendix of variant readings means that we have, in fact, got all the information there. It's exactly the same thing that you have in the widgets on the right, exactly the same information. Just with those, they're actually actionable. Right. And of course, you can do more extensive things, like you can have these mouse over lookups. You can have actual links.
What do are those mouse overs when you're referencing another author, like Glaser, for example? What happens?
That would actually be
or is that an actual hyperlink?
That is an actual hyperlink to the bibliography. Glaser was an editor of this text and had an edition, and a very significant edition that changed a bunch of things. And yeah, so that's a hyperlink.
But are those hyperlinks? It looks like that's within your own site, though. No, it's
Yes.
not an external hyperlink.
There are also external hyperlinks. I don't remember if Glaser. Yeah, so there's a Google Books version.
Right. Okay.
So you go to the bibliography and you can get out to the actual thing where that's available.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about the audience that you're expecting for a scholarly edition like this?
Mm-hmm. Ideally, these would be texts that anybody could use. I mean, my sort of dream vision is that the first text you come to when you do an online search is actually the best text you could use, and that there's not this, you don't have this kind of hill to climb where, okay, you realize that in fact I'm going to have to request this through interlibrary loan if I want a proper version of this text, and I can't really trust this thing I see when I do a Google search. How do you make that logical leap? And how do you do it without becoming embarrassed by your pathetic lack of knowledge, right? The answer is you shouldn't have to. Yeah?
And I don't know if this takes us in a good direction or not, but it's just thinking about the particular problematic quote that we've been looking at through all of this is itself referenced by Ezra Pound. And so I'm thinking of a more contemporary poet who is going to find the Pound reference in this is how they stumble into all of this.
Yeah.
And how because they're not likely to be a classicist if they're following it because they're trying to understand Pound's poetry from that period.
Yeah.
So how do we, and this might not be a question we want to answer right now, but thinking about how we avoid having someone following that train of thought falling into an error.
Well, this is exactly the kind of thing that that worries me, and of course, modern literature is absolutely packed with this stuff. You know, like you can't get through the first couple of pages of Ulysses without stumbling over a bunch of classical references that you won't necessarily get you know, unless you're a classicist. Yeah, I think, again, this is an accessibility problem, and it's an accessibility problem on a couple of different axes. You not only, you don't want to lay traps for, you know, the student, but you also don't want to lay traps for the English professor who's, you know, who's writing an article and just wants to track this reference down. You know, and might be interested to know that, you know, actually this might have been sarcastic. Pound wouldn't have known that because he wouldn't have had access to an edition that suggested it didn't belong there. Yeah.
There's another reader of these texts, the computer reader.
Yes, there it is.
And so while you can highlight ambiguities and uncertainties and provide context for human readers, if you have a script that just wants to bring in these texts and count words or perform linguistic analysis or produce visualizations, are they able to make use of, how do they understand problem areas?
Well, yeah, so that is a big question. One answer is that they themselves probably can't, and that we have to be careful about what we feed into our algorithms. And the thing that probably gets fed into the algorithm is this, you know, where, you know, how are you properly going to analyze you know, grammar and word association if these lines don't actually belong here? Right? If that apparent flow is not the real flow, that is a real problem. And again, it's not obvious that it is a problem, because if you're going to do that kind of work, you're just going to come and grab this text and, you know, throw it in the hopper and see what happens. So, you know, this is another way where not showing your warts actually can cause all kinds of problems down the end. And one tangent I decided not to go down was, you know, we see all the time these kinds of things where you know, people will base arguments on word searches that they've done using Google's you know, co-reference tool, whose name currently escapes me, and you know, not realizing that that's biased by the kinds of material that have gone into it. So, like, there was a New York Times article talking about how talk about God had decreased dramatically in the last few years. But in fact, you know, Google in the last, you know, has, like, the last 40 years or so, has like a massive technical literature that's been added to its database. So if you don't realize that, it looks like the proportion of God talk has gone down. But, you know, in fact, it probably hasn't. It's probably the same or more than it ever was. It's just that there's a whole bunch of material that wouldn't talk about that sort of thing, that's in there biasing the result. And, you know, well, algorithmic bias is a whole other vast problem. And I don't see how you get at it without understanding what's going in to the front of the pipeline.
I wonder if you could just maybe expand on that just a little bit more, because I heard you sort of make a case for this kind of slow community-wide work in the context of learners and in the context of classics, where maybe the text corpus is more manageable than, say, the 19th century.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could sort of like push a little bit further on sort of like what this slow method has to offer groups where the text base is just sort of inevitably bigger, or where there are different factors at play.
Well, I'm not sure I've got sort of easy answers. I think that we tend to be very concerned with doing things quickly, and part of the problem is we don't, by pushing ahead fast, we don't actually allow time for failure and for the development of expertise. And we don't necessarily do a very good job of cultivating expertise. We do, I think, a particularly bad job of it off the faculty track. So, you know, and unfortunately for DH kinds of projects, no one is going to be able to do stuff all by themselves. And this is actually a nice kind of example of that. This thing is one of my favorites. I don't expect anyone to be able to read either of it. I can read the Greek, but I can't read the Latin. I mean, I can't read the Arabic. There are massive, wonderful problems here. So this is a text on papyrus. It's a protocol. So it's kind of, you can think of it like a cover sheet for a papyrus roll of these could be legal texts or pronouncements, all that sort of thing. And it's damaged down its left side. The Greek is an almost straight translation of the Arabic. And because Arabic is left to right and Greek is right to left, the Arabic gives you the beginning of the Greek, and the Greek lets you complete the Arabic. These brackets are showing you where the editor has been able to supplement the text. And the reason, one of the reasons why the editor can supplement, this is a lot of Greek, right? I mean, this is, how do you know that's there? Well, you know it's there because the Arabic tells you. And you can tell that the one is the translation of the other. So it's in the name of God, the merciful and compassionate. There is no God except God alone, and Muhammad is his prophet, is the prophet of God. It's very formulaic. These things are. But you know, this is cool because of that. It's cool because it's a bilingual text. So the Duke Databank of Documentary Papyri was exclusively Greek and Latin. So when you ran into a document like this, it would have had like, there's something missing here, and here's the Greek, and there's something missing here, and there's the Greek, and there's something missing here, and there's the Greek. The Arabic Papyri database does the opposite. So it has the Arabic, and you know, okay, there's something there, and there's the Arabic, and there's something there, and the Arabic, and there's something there. And this is partly the vagaries of, this is the vagaries of expertise and of digital stuff. I mean, there wasn't a good way to do Arabic when the Duke Databank was first doing this text. And the Arabists are ignoring the Greek because they're concerned with the Arabic. But you want to be able to put these things together. Really. And of course, there's another layer of problems because there's alignment, you know, and how do you you can't just like right align the Arabic because it'll be over there and the Greek will be over here. So you've got to do stuff to make sure they're kind of occupying the same space. Really, the line numbering should probably be on both sides to be sort of polite. and you can see, here's a wart, by the way. So this is a gap, but it's a gap in the Arabic. But how you indicate a gap is in Latin letters, which run left to right. But it's in right to left text, so the bracketing is wrong. It's fixable, but these are the kinds of things you have to overcome, and you have to overcome them by making mistakes and by talking to the people who are experts in both. And the papyri.info has this kind of elaborate vetting mechanism for texts that are submitted and corrections that are submitted. So there's an editorial board, and you check a text out, and you make your changes, and you submit them, and the editors review it. And if they like it, they'll promote it to the public site. But they might say, no, you got to go back and change this one thing. So there's that, but they're all Greek experts. What do you do when you have something like this, which is it's disruptive by its very existence, right? They can't properly evaluate the Arabic. The Arabic papyri database folks presumably don't feel like they can or want to properly evaluate the Greek. We've sort of got to work together in ways that the structures we've established for vetting these things weren't originally set up to allow. In practice, that means you send an email to the guy who did this, Usama Gad, and you ask him, does this look okay? And he says yes, and so you publish it. But that means you've got to have those kinds of cross-cutting collaborative networks set up in the first place in order to be able to do that. You can't just do it out of the box. And a text like this might always come along and just disrupt all your plans. So that's one of the things I love about it. The other thing I just noticed and want to follow up on. So this word should be symbulos, but it's got a tau there instead. I don't know why. I want to try and track that down, because if it's it's not there in the original publication of this, so it could just be a typo. But if it is there, it might indicate the scribe who wrote this didn't actually know Greek, because that's impossible in Greek. You don't get that letter combination, which would be interesting. Anyway, so yeah, I've gone sort of completely off piste now. So I want to just sort of conclude by all of this is kind of possible because we've had the leisure to do it in a measured way. We haven't had to knock things out really quickly. And I think in the end that developing a culture where expertise can be nourished is going to pay off more than the kind of culture we live in now, where we think expertise is something that we can bring in when we need it. We have sort of just-in-time networks now, where we'll get a consultant, we'll hire a programmer just for the period of the grant, and while the initial expense may be a lot higher, I think we do better by investing in people and cultivating them and bringing them along and lifting them up. And I think that's also part of the key to dealing with the diversity and inclusion issues that we face, all over the place. So that's kind of where I want to conclude. I think we need to give people space and time to grow into their positions. We need to make investments in people. Best in a lente.
Thank you. I'm sure that you would be happy to sort of hang around and chat with folks.
Yeah, very much.
And do sort of side discussions and more Q&A.
Definitely.
So thank you very much for coming every week in and week out now here in the conference room for further digital dialogue.